It's a real pleasure to be here, to talk to you here in the Coolidge Corner Theatre, in part because, we've been coming here for years, and actually have been to this series many times. So it's really fun to get the chance to talk to you. And tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about emotions, what they are and what they're not, and prepare you for the wonderful experience of seeing Inside Out. So how many of you, I'm expecting this to be a kind of a popular answer here, but how many of you really love cartoons? Yeah, they're awesome, right? And there's a lot of science in cartoons. So cartoon chemistry is about mixing colorful liquids and test tubes until they blow up. And cartoon physics is about running off a cliff and not falling until you look down. If only. And so tonight, we're going to watch some cartoons about the science of emotion. Supposedly, we have little characters that live in our brains, one for joy, one for sadness, disgust, fear, and anger. And joy is the leader in this movie because this is the U.S. where we have 500 best-selling books about how to be happy. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't expect to learn about chemistry from watching cartoons. I don't really expect to learn about physics. I know that gravity unfortunately exists. And so when it comes to emotion, you might not expect that Pixar's Inside Out will give you the inside scoop on how emotions work. But actually, this film was inspired by a set of ideas that make up a prominent scientific approach to understanding emotion, which goes by the name of basic emotion theory or discrete emotion theory. And the facts of this approach, although very popular and have been around for a really long time, are as fictional as Wile E. Coyote. The first idea that's very popular is, that's a fiction, is that emotions are displayed on the face with expressions that we all recognize. So according to this view, people are supposed to smile when they're happy, they're supposed to frown when they're sad, they're supposed to scowl when they're angry, and everyone around the world is supposed to make these expressions and also recognize emotions in these expressions. Now, to show you that this is a fiction, if this were an academic talk, I would be showing you data from hundreds of studies to demonstrate to you that this is a fiction. Luckily, I'm going to spare you that tonight. And I'm just going to summarize hundreds of studies for you, which basically goes like this. When people look at this girl's face, they typically see her as sad, or as tired, or as grieving, mournful. In fact, this is my daughter Sophia from a couple of years ago when she was at we were visiting the Cologne Chocolate Museum. And she's on her second chocolate drink. And I can assure you that she is experiencing what I can only describe as a profound and deep sense of pleasure. And this little sweetheart is also experiencing pleasure. So the lesson here is that people move their faces in many different ways during instances of the same emotion category. Now, if we were only to focus on this little guy's eyebrows, what we would see is a set of movements that look very much like the stereotype of an anger expression, like this guy, for example. When people look at this guy's face, they think he looks furious. But actually, this is Jim Webb, who won the senatorial race in Virginia in 2006, returning the Senate to Democratic control. This is Massachusetts, so I expect a big whoop here. I have to tell you, I travel all over the country, and when I tell that joke, oftentimes it's like complete silence. You can hear a pin drop. And then I have to tell people explicitly, that's a joke, and people in other parts of the country would laugh, which then usually I'm trying to shame people into laughing. Without context, we see Jim Webb's face as communicating anger because, in fact, this face symbolizes anger in our culture. But the lesson here is that people not only move their faces in different ways during instances of the same emotion category, they also move their faces in exactly the same way during instances of different emotion categories. So the fact is that when it comes to emotion, a face does not speak for itself. Facial movements are not random. They are situated. They're tied to the situation that they're in. So when you see emotion in another person's face, what's actually happening under the hood is that your brain is making a guess about what those facial movements mean. And these guesses occur automatically and effortlessly on your part, and you typically have no awareness that your brain is making these guesses. Even people who believe that they read other people really well are actually guessing. And these guesses are making meaning out of the raise of an eyebrow, or the tilt of a head, or the curl of a lip. And this is how a single feature, like a smile, can take on very different emotional meanings in different contexts. So, when it comes to facial expressions of emotion, variation is the norm. Again, not random, but situated, tied to the situation. So the wizards at Pixar actually knew this. They did a great job of building this variation into the characters in Inside Out. Because, you know, it would have been a really boring movie if Mr. Anger, all he did was blow his step, right? So he makes all kinds of facial expressions in this movie, depicting all kinds of, a whole range of emotional events. And he depicts anger not only by blowing his step. And this kind of variation that we see is not only true for facial movements that express emotions. Actually, we see this variation in any kind of physical change that scientists can measure during emotional events. The next fiction about emotion is that each emotion has its own unique pattern of physical changes in the body. So the idea being that your heart rate always goes up in fear, or your blood pressure always goes up in anger. This is a fiction, because that's actually not how it works. And rather than showing you a lot of data, I'll just summarize the data from hundreds of studies that we have analyzed and summarized in my lab. I'm going to summarize the punchline here with these images. These are all instances of things that might make someone feel happy. Taking a walk in the woods, or lounging on the beach, or whipping cake batter to bake cake for friends, or doing a yoga class, gossiping with friends, or gardening. Now, in each case, the category of emotion is the same. It's an instance of happiness. But the physical actions that your body takes are different. And as a consequence, the changes in your heart rate and your breathing and all of the systems inside your body also vary from instance to instance. So, since the 1970s, physiologists have known that your heart rate and your breathing and all of the systems inside your body correspond to the physical actions that you take, or the actions that your brain plans for you to take. So the lesson here is that actions, and therefore physiological changes, vary across instances of the same emotion category. And similarly, the same physical change can be seen across instances of different categories. It all depends on the context. So an increase in heart rate is not inherent to fear, or to happiness, or to anger, or to any other emotion. In fact, physical changes in your body have no inherent emotional meaning. Your brain has to make these bodily changes meaningful as an emotion. The third fiction that we're going to talk about tonight is the idea that each emotion has its own dedicated circuit in the brain. And this is the one piece of data I am going to show you. So I am a neuroscientist, which means I do have to show you an image of a real brain If I don't, I get kicked out of the group. So here what you're looking at is a slice of the brain. If you were to slice your head, or let's say my head, down this, in this right, which I can assure you some of my colleagues would love to do this, slice my head this way, and pop open the front, and I was looking in the mirror, this is what we'd see. And the brain region that I've outlined in red there is the infamous amygdala. They actually have two, one on each side. How many of you here have heard of the amygdala? Yeah, because it's like the rock star of brain regions. This is a brain region which is in the news a lot. Reporters and journalists like to write about it. And it's supposedly the home of fear. So what I'm going to show you now is a summary of hundreds of experiments that looked at people's brain activity while they were experiencing various emotions. And here's the proportion along the vertical axis there of studies that show an increase in amygdala activity when people are fearful. So it's more than what you would expect by chance. About 30%, in about 30% of the studies we see an increase in amygdala activity when people feel fearful. But that's much less than what you would expect if this brain region held the circuit for fear that was dedicated to fear. And in fact, every emotion ever studied shows an increase in amygdala activity some of the time. And in fact, you see increases in amygdala activity even when someone is not in an emotional state. So for example, if I showed you a face that you've never seen before, even a neutral face, and I was scanning your brain, I'd see wild activity in your amygdala because it responds to information that is ambiguous or uncertain. Now this finding of increases in activity in a region that is supposedly dedicated to emotion, we see this actually in every single brain region that's ever been nominated as a brain region for emotion. And it doesn't matter whether we look at networks in the brain, it doesn't matter whether we look at patterns across the brain, variability is the norm. So emotions are complex constructions. They are not simple circuits. Your brain does not have an emotional control panel operated by little characters, even though some of the time, that's actually the way it feels to us, right? But the way, our brains are masters of deception. They create experiences without ever tipping their hand about how they do it. So this idea that your brain comes pre-wired with ancient emotion circuits that are buried deep inside some animalistic part of your brain is what philosophers call essentialism, that there's an essence to each emotion category. Essentialism is common sense, but it's not good science. But because it's common sense, it makes for great entertainment. And as you'll see in the film tonight, it makes for some pretty hilarious scenes in the movie. But in reality, there are no emotion circuits in your head, in his head. They're not even in his head. There are just no circuits. Your brain doesn't work like that. So what's up with the belief that each emotion has its own expression, its own bodily fingerprint, its own circuit in the brain? Where did this idea come from? Well, these are stereotypes or caricatures. Think of them as like emojis. And because they're examples of essentialism, people find it really hard to relinquish them, even when the preponderance of scientific evidence does not support their existence. They create stories about them, and those stories make for great entertainment. But emotions are not your reactions to the world. They're your brain's understanding of what is going on inside your own body in relation to what is going on in the world. Because your brain is trying to figure out what those sensations mean so that your brain knows what to do next to keep you alive and well. So your brain doesn't encounter a situation and then react to it with emotion. Emotions actually are what situations mean in an embodied way. Emotions are not built into your brain from birth. They're just built by your brain on an as-needed basis. Emotions don't happen to you. They are actually made by you. Or to say it more clearly, I would say they're made by your brain in concert with information from the world and information from your body. So an emotion is an event. It's a whole brain event where your brain is making meaning of internal sensations in terms of what is going on around you in the world. And this is how an ache in your gut can be longing, can be anxiety, can be hunger. It can even be a belief that someone is guilty of a crime. A fuller discussion of these ideas and about the science of emotion in general can be found in my book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, or on my public website where I have lots of videos and articles and so on that talk about these ideas and the scientific findings behind them. But tonight I just want to leave you with this final thought. You know, Pixar makes great movies. They do a fantastic job of depicting emotion in all kinds of objects and creatures, like in toys, and in food, and in sea creatures. I don't know if you've seen Finding Dory, but this is the best character Pixar has ever made. This octopus guy, he's like totally my favorite. Right? In computers, yeah. In bugs, in cars, and now in humans. And whoops, and now in humans. As you see tonight. It might not be good science, but it is good fun. So enjoy the show.